The recreation hall on Coalition Station Helios 9 was loud with the sounds of a dozen different species. Soldiers from across the galaxy gathered here during their downtime, sharing drinks and stories under the pale blue lights. The air smelled like a strange mix of foods that no single species would enjoy, but everyone had learned to ignore it. Jack Holloway sat at a corner table with a small group of younger soldiers. He was a man in his mid-40s, with gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. His left arm was prosthetic, a simple military model that he never bothered to cover with synthetic skin. He held a cup of coffee in his right hand and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. They called them berserkers, Jack said. Warriors who felt no pain, no fear. They would take wounds that should have killed them and keep fighting. Some said they were touched by the gods. Others said they were simply mad. Kara Webb leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. She was 28, a lieutenant who had been assigned to the Coalition unit 3 months ago. She had heard rumors about Jack's past, about the things he had done before becoming a liaison officer, but he never talked about himself. Did they really exist? She asked. Jack smiled. Every myth has some truth in it, Lieutenant. The berserkers were real men. They just knew something that most people forget. And what is that? Another young soldier asked. Before Jack could answer, a harsh laugh cut through the air. Jack looked up to see Commander Varax approaching with his squad. Varax was Thalassian, a species of tall reptilian warriors with scales the color of dark stone. They were known throughout the galaxy for their strength and their pride. Human stories, Varax said, his voice dripping with amusement. Always so dramatic. Always so desperate. His second command, a scarred warrior named Drin, grinned with too many teeth. Tell me, human, do your people truly believe such nonsense? Warriors who ignore death. It sounds like a fantasy for children. Kara's hands tightened into fists under the table. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jack placed a gentle hand on her arm. It is just a story, Sergeant, Jack said calmly. Something to pass the time. Drin laughed again. Of course it is. Because the truth is less impressive, yes? Humans are soft, fragile. You break easily and heal slowly. You die from wounds that my kind would barely notice. Several other Thalassians had gathered behind their commander, and they chuckled at Drin's words. The younger human soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but Jack remained still. Varax crossed his thick arms over his chest. I have fought beside humans before, storyteller. I have seen what you are capable of. It is not much. Perhaps you saw what we chose to show you, Jack said. The Thalassian commander's eyes narrowed. Chose? You speak as if you were holding back. I assure you, in the battles I witnessed, your people gave everything they had. It simply was not enough. Jack took a slow sip of his coffee. Then I suppose we have different memories of those battles, Commander. The air between them grew tense. Kara watched the exchange with a mixture of admiration and fear. She had never seen anyone speak to a Thalassian commander with such calm defiance. Most humans either avoided them entirely or tried too hard to earn their respect. Varax stepped closer, looming over the table. You are bold for such a small creature. But bold words do not make you strong. Your myths are nothing but lies your ancestors told themselves to feel better about their weakness. Jack looked up at the massive warrior without a trace of fear in his eyes. Every myth has a seed of truth, Commander. Perhaps one day you will see it for yourself. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Varax snorted and turned away. Come, he said to his squad. We waste our time with dreamers. The Thalassians walked away, their laughter echoing through the hall. Kara let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Sir, why did you let them talk to you like that? She asked. We could have told them about the Battle of Rigel, or the siege of New Manila, or any of the 100 times humans proved themselves. Jack shook his head slowly. Words prove nothing, Lieutenant. They would not believe us anyway. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. But they disrespect us. They disrespect all of humanity. Let them, Jack said. Pride is a heavy thing to carry. Eventually, it makes you stumble. Before Kara could respond, the station's alarm system blared to life. Red lights flashed across the ceiling, and every soldier in the hall immediately rose to their feet. Attention all personnel, a voice announced over the speakers. Emergency briefing in 15 minutes. A hostile force has been detected approaching Colony World. Varus 4. All available combat units are to report to the main briefing room. Jack finished his coffee and stood. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a man who had answered such alarms many times before. It seems the lesson will come sooner than expected, he said quietly. Kara stood beside him, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. She had trained for moments like this, but training was not the same as reality. She looked at Jack, at the calm certainty in his eyes, and felt a little of her fear fade. Sir, have you ever fought alongside Thalassians before? She asked as they walked toward the briefing room. Once or twice. What was it like? Jack was silent for a moment. Then he said, They are fierce warriors. Strong. Fast. They believe they are the best soldiers in the galaxy. He paused at the entrance to the briefing room, where Varax and his squad were already gathering. But they have never truly seen what humans become when they have nothing left to lose. Kara frowned. And what is that? Jack looked at her, and for just a second, she saw something ancient and dangerous in his eyes. Something that did not belong to the quiet, patient man she thought she knew. Something that even the Thalassians should fear, he said Don. Then he walked into the briefing room, and Kara followed, filled with questions she did not yet know how to ask. The briefing room was packed with soldiers from a dozen different species. Holographic displays showed the planet Varus 4 rotating slowly above the central table. It was a green and blue world, home to nearly 50,000 colonists from various member species of the Coalition. Admiral Chun, a human woman with silver hair and a stern face, stood at the front of the room. Her voice was clear and strong as she explained the situation. Approximately 6 hours ago, we detected a raider fleet entering the Varus system. They have bypassed our outer defenses and are currently making their approach to the colony. Their numbers are significant. We estimate at least 200 ground troops. Murmurs spread through the room. 200 raiders was not a small force. These were not simple pirates looking for easy targets. This was an organized attack. A joint strike team will be deployed to intercept the raiders before they can reach the main population center. Admiral Chun continued. Commander Varax will lead the ground assault with his Thalassian squad. Human forces under Liaison Officer Holloway will provide support. Karen noticed the way Varax smiled when he heard his name. It was the smile of someone who expected to win easily. She also noticed that Jack showed no reaction at all. After the briefing ended, the strike team gathered in the transport bay. There were 12 Thalassians in full combat armor, and 8 humans in lighter tactical gear. The difference in size and equipment was obvious. The Thalassians carried heavy plasma weapons and war armor that could stop most projectiles. The humans had standard rifles and basic protection. Vorax approached Jack as the soldiers prepared to board the transport ship. I will make this simple, human. You and your people will stay in the rear. Provide covering fire if needed. Do not get in our way. Jack nodded. Understood, Commander. Kara stepped forward, unable to stay silent. Sir, our training qualifies us for frontline combat. We can do more than just provide cover. Varax looked down at her with cold amusement. Can you? Tell me, little human. How fast can you run? How much weight can you carry? Can your bones survive a fall from 10 meters? He shook his head. I have seen humans try to fight beside Thalassians. They slow us down. They get injured. They die. Stay in the rear where you belong. Kara wanted to argue, but Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. The commander has made his decision, Lieutenant. We will follow orders. The transport ship lifted off from Helios 9 and entered the darkness of space. The journey to Varys 4 would take several hours. Most soldiers spent the time checking their equipment or resting. But the Thalassians seemed unable to stay quiet. Drin walked through the human section of the ship, looking at each soldier with obvious contempt. Look at them, he said loudly to his companions. So small, so soft. I wonder how they survived long enough to reach the stars. One of the younger human soldiers, a private named Cole, looked up with anger in his eyes. We survived just fine, Sergeant. Maybe you should read some history. Drin laughed. History? You mean the stories you tell yourselves? The great human victories? He leaned closer, his breath hot and foul. Every victory you claim was won through numbers or luck. Never through strength. Never through skill. Cole started to rise, but Jack spoke calmly from across the cabin. Private. Sit down. Cole hesitated, then obeyed. Drin looked at Jack with a mocking grin. You control your pack well, old man. But control is not the same as power. Jack did not respond. He simply sat with his eyes closed, conserving his energy for what was to come. Kara moved to sit beside him. Sir, why you let them say these things? I know you have stories. I know you have done things that would make them think twice. Jack opened his eyes slowly. What good would stories do, Lieutenant? Varax believes what he believes. Drin believes what Drin believes. Words from a human will not change their minds. They need to see the truth for themselves. And what is the truth? Jack was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at his prosthetic arm, flexing the mechanical fingers one by one. I lost this arm on a planet called Carrion 6. There were 40 of us against 300 enemies. We were cut off, surrounded, no hope of rescue for at least 2 days. Kara listened in silence. This was the first time Jack had ever spoken of his past. When I lost my arm, I had already been fighting for 6 hours. I was tired. I was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Any reasonable person would have stopped, would have surrendered, would have died. Jack looked at her with eyes that seemed very far away. But I did not stop. I could not. Something inside me refused to let go. What happened? I fought for another 4 hours with one arm. When the rescue finally came, I had killed 37 enemies by myself. They found me standing over the bodies, still holding my weapon, unable to remember the last 2 hours of the battle. Kara stared at him. That is not possible. Jack smiled sadly. That is what the doctor said. That is what the general said. That is what everyone said. But it happened. And it was not special. It was not unique to me. Any human, pushed far enough, can find what I found that day. Before Kara could respond, the pilot's voice came over the speakers. Attention all personnel. We are receiving updated intelligence from Varys 4. The Raider force is larger than expected. They have already landed and begun their assault on the colony. The mood in the transport changed instantly. Soldiers checked their weapons and tightened their armor. Vorak stood at the front of the cabin, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. It does not matter how many there are, the commander said. We will crush them like we crush all our enemies. Jack said nothing. He simply stood up and prepared for landing. His face calm and unreadable, the transport began its descent through the atmosphere of Varys 4. Through the windows, Kara could see smoke rising from the colony below. Buildings were burning. The raiders had already done terrible damage. As the ship touched down, Jack leaned close to Kara and spoke quietly. "Stay close to me, Lieutenant. What happens next will not be easy. But I need you to remember something." "What is that, sir?" Jack looked at her with those ancient, dangerous eyes. "Remember that fear is just a feeling. Pain is just information. And death is just a door. Humans have been walking through that door and coming back for thousands of years. Today, you will learn why." The transport doors opened, and the soldiers rushed out into the chaos of battle. Kara followed Jack into the smoke and fire, her heart pounding, not knowing that everything she believed about humans was about to change forever. The colony was burning. Smoke filled the streets, and the sounds of weapons fire echoed between the damaged buildings. Kara kept her rifle ready as she followed Jack through the chaos. The Thalassians moved ahead, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Commander Varax led his squad with confidence, cutting through the streets without slowing down. They had already killed a dozen raiders in the first few minutes, and his warriors were hungry for more. "They are weak," Varax called out to his troops. "Push forward. End this quickly." Jack watched the commander from his position in the rear. His eyes moved constantly, studying the buildings, the shadows, the places where enemies could hide. Something felt wrong. The raiders were retreating too easily. They were giving ground without a real fight. "Commander," Jack said through the communication channel, "I recommend we slow down. This could be a trap." Varax did not even turn around. "I do not need advice from a support unit. Keep your humans in the back and let real warriors do their work." Kara looked at Jack. "Sir, he is not listening." "No," Jack said quietly. "He is not." They moved deeper into the colony, passing destroyed homes and abandoned vehicles. The colonists had fled to underground shelters when the attack began. The streets were empty except for the bodies of raiders the Thalassians had killed. Then they entered the central plaza. It happened in seconds. The moment Varax and his squad stepped into the open space, weapons fire exploded from every direction. Raiders appeared on rooftops, in windows, behind barricades. There were at least 100 of them, far more than the intelligence had suggested. 3 Thalassians fell in the first wave of fire. Their heavy armor could stop small weapons, but the raiders had brought military-grade plasma cannons. Even Thalassian scales could not survive a direct hit. "Ambush!" Varax roared. "Take cover!" But there was little cover in the plaza. The Thalassians scrambled for protection behind broken walls and overturned vehicles. More of them fell as the raiders continued their assault from elevated positions. Drin was hit in the leg and crashed to the ground. He tried to crawl towards safety, but the raiders focused their fire on him, pinning him down in the open. Kara pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. She had never seen combat like this. The noise was deafening. The chaos was overwhelming. For a moment, she could not move. She could not think. Then she heard Jack's voice, calm and steady through her earpiece. "All human units on me. We are going to flank left and take out that rooftop position." Kara looked at him. He was standing upright, completely exposed to enemy fire, studying the battlefield like a man reading a map. Bullets and plasma bolts flew past him, but he did not flinch. He did not even seem to notice. "Sir, you need to take cover," she shouted. "No time," Jack said. "Follow me." He moved. Not like a soldier avoiding fire. He moved like water flowing through rocks, finding the gaps, using every shadow and angle. The other humans followed him, and Kara forced herself to move as well. They circled around the edge of the plaza, staying low and quiet while the Thalassians drew the enemy's attention. Jack led them to a building on the left side where raiders were firing down at the trapped coalition forces. "Cole, Martinez, take the ground floor," Jack ordered. Lieutenant Webb with me. We are going up. They entered the building and climbed the stairs quickly. Jack moved without hesitation, his prosthetic arm holding his rifle as steadily as any flesh and blood limb. When they reached the third floor, they found 8 raiders focused on the battle below. They never saw the humans coming. Jack and Kara opened fire at the same moment. The raiders fell before they could react. Within seconds, the rooftop position was clear. 1 down, Jack said into his communicator. Moving to the next position. Below, the pressure on the Thalassians eased slightly. Varax looked up at the now silent rooftop with surprise in his eyes. Then he saw Jack moving to the next building, clearing the way with quiet efficiency. But the raiders had noticed the human counterattack. A group of them broke away from the main assault and moved to intercept Jack's team. Kara spotted them coming through a side street. "Contact!" she shouted. 12 hostiles approaching from the east. Jack made a quick decision. All units fall back to the secondary position. I will hold them here. Sir, you cannot fight 12 of them alone, Cole protested. I am not asking for permission, Private. Go. Kara hesitated. She did not want to leave him. But Jack looked at her with those calm, certain eyes, and she found herself obeying. She led the other humans away while Jack turned to face the approaching enemies. What happened next would stay in Kara's memory forever. She looked back and saw Jack step out of cover, directly into the path of the raiders. They opened fire, and she saw at least 2 shots hit him. One in the shoulder, one in the side. He should have fallen. Any normal person would have fallen, but Jack did not fall. He walked forward into the gunfire, his rifle barking steadily. 1 raider dropped, then another, then a third. The remaining enemies seemed confused by this human who refused to die. They fired again and again, but Jack kept coming. He killed 5 of them before his rifle ran empty. Then he drew a combat knife from his belt and closed the distance to the survivors. Kara watched in horror and amazement as this quiet, patient man became something else entirely. Something that moved like a predator. Something that felt no pain. Something that could not be stopped. When it was over, 12 raiders lay dead in the street. Jack stood among them, bleeding from multiple wounds, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. But he was still standing. He turned and walked back toward the coalition position. Kara ran to meet him, her hands shaking as she reached for his wounds. Sir, you are hurt. You need medical attention. Jack shook his head. Later, we need to regroup. They found the Thalassians in a ruined building at the edge of the plaza. Half of Varax's squad was dead or badly wounded. Drin had been dragged to safety, but he had lost a lot of blood. The commander himself had a deep wound in his arm that he was ignoring through pure stubbornness. When Drin saw Jack walk in, covered in blood but still moving, his eyes went wide. That is not possible, he whispered. I saw you get hit. Multiple times. You should be dead. Jack sat down against the wall and finally allowed himself to show a small sign of pain. Should be, he agreed. But I am not. The sound of raiders regrouping outside filled the silence. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of time, and somewhere in the ruins. Kara realized she was no longer afraid. She was watching a myth come to life. And for the first time, she understood why the old stories existed. The ruined building offered little protection, but it was all they had. The survivors of the Coalition strike team gathered in what had once been a family home. Now it was just broken walls and fallen debris. Kara counted the remaining soldiers. 6 Thalassians, including Commander Varax and the badly wounded Drin. 7 humans, including Jack and herself. 13 soldiers against an unknown number of raiders who controlled it. Surrounding streets thought their communications were jammed. No signals were getting through to the Coalition fleet. There would be no quick rescue. Varax sat against the wall, his wounded arm wrapped in a rough bandage. The proud commander looked different now. Smaller, somehow. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. "We need to assess our ammunition," Jack said, taking charge without asking for permission. "Check supplies and report." The soldiers obeyed without question. Even the Thalassians followed his orders. No one challenged him now. Kara moved to Jack's side and began examining his wounds. When she pulled back his torn uniform, she gasped. There were at least 4 serious injuries on his body. The shoulder wound was deep, exposing muscle and bone. The shot to his side had cracked at least 2 ribs. Blood soaked through his clothing and dripped onto the floor. "This is impossible," she said. "You should not be conscious. You should not be alive." Jack looked down at his wounds as if they belonged to someone else. "The body wants to survive, Lieutenant. Sometimes you just have to listen to it." Dren was watching from across the room. Despite his own pain, he could not look away from the human who had killed 12 enemies after being shot multiple times. "How?" he asked, his voice weak. "How did you do that?" Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice calm and patient, like a teacher explaining something simple to a confused student. "Your species evolved as predators," he said. "You were always strong, always fast. You never needed to push beyond your limits because your limits were already so high." Varax looked up, listening despite himself. "Humans evolved differently," Jack continued. "We were not the strongest animals on our world. We were not the fastest. We could not fly or breathe underwater. Our claws were small, our teeth were weak, and our skin offered no protection. Then how did you survive?" Dren asked. "We refused to die." The simple words hung in the air. Outside, they could hear the raiders moving through the streets, searching for survivors. "There is something inside every human," Jack said. "Something that activates when we are pushed to the edge. When our minds tell us to stop, our bodies find another way. When our bodies fail, our will takes over." He looked at his prosthetic arm. "On Carrion 6, I lost this arm in the middle of a battle. The pain was beyond anything I can describe. Every instinct told me to fall, to stop, to surrender to the darkness. But you did not," Kara said softly. "No, because something deeper than instinct took control. Something that has been inside humans since we were running from predators on the plains of our home world. We learned that stopping meant death. So we learned to never stop." Varax shook his head slowly. "I have seen humans fall in battle. I have seen them die from wounds far less severe than what you carry now." "Of course," Jack agreed. "Most humans never need to access what lies beneath. We live comfortable lives. We forget what we truly are. But when we are pushed far enough, when we have something worth fighting for, we remember." He looked around the room at the wounded soldiers, human and Thalassian alike. "Your people have a word for warriors who fight beyond death," Jack said to Varax. "You call them legends, myths, impossible stories." "The Keshar," Varax said quietly. "The undying ones. We have many names for them too. Berserkers, last stand soldiers, heroes who walk through fire." Jack smiled, but there was no humor in it. "They are not special humans. They are just humans who found what was always inside them." Dren stared at him with something new in his eyes. Not fear, not disbelief. Something closer to wonder. "You are saying all humans can do this?" he asked. "Any human who is pushed far enough. Any human who has something worth dying for." Jack looked at Kara. "It is not strength in the way you understand it. It is something else. A refusal to accept limits. A stubbornness that defies logic and reason." Varax spoke slowly, as if working through a difficult problem. On the transport, you did not defend yourself when we mocked you. You let us believe you were weak. Why? Because telling you would have meant nothing. You needed to see it. Jack paused as a wave of pain crossed his face. And because what I am is not special. Every human soldier in this room could do what I did. They just have not learned how yet. Outside, the raiders had finished regrouping. Kara could hear their commander shouting orders. They were preparing for a final assault. Jack pushed himself to his feet. The movement clearly caused him great pain, but his face remained calm. He picked up his rifle and checked the ammunition. 1 magazine left. Sir, what are you doing? Kara asked, though she already knew the answer. They will attack soon. If they get to this building, everyone dies. If I meet them outside, I can buy time. You will die. Jack looked at her, and she saw something warm beneath the cold determination. Perhaps. But perhaps the rescue will come while I am buying those minutes. Perhaps you will survive because I gave you that chance. Varax rose painfully to his feet. You cannot face them alone. I can. And I will. But the Thalassian commander shook his head. No, I was wrong about your kind. Human. I was wrong about many things. He picked up his weapon with his uninjured arm. If you are going to show me what humans truly are, then I will stand beside you and watch. One by one, the other soldiers who could still move began to rise. Drin tried to stand but collapsed. 2 other Thalassians were too wounded to fight. But the rest, human and Thalassian alike, formed up behind Jack. Kara checked her rifle and moved to his side. You said any human can find what you found. Maybe today I will learn how. Jack looked at the small group of wounded warriors who were willing to die beside him. For a moment, something like pride crossed his face. Stay close to me, he said. Watch how I move. Watch how I fight. And when your body tells you to fall, remember what I told you. What is that? Jack walked toward the door, toward the army waiting outside, toward almost certain death. Pain is just information. Fear is just a feeling. And death is just a door. He paused at the threshold and looked back. Humans have been walking through that door for a very long time. Tonight, you will learn why we keep coming back. Then he stepped out into the darkness, and the others followed. The street was dark, except for the fires still burning in the distance. Jack stepped out of the ruined building and saw the raiders gathering at the far end of the road. There were at least 50 of them, heavily armed and ready for the final assault. He did not hesitate. He did not take cover. He simply walked forward. The raiders opened fire immediately. Jack felt a bullet graze his leg, another strike his already wounded shoulder. The impacts should have dropped him. His body was already damaged beyond what most beings could endure. But something had awakened inside him, something ancient and primal that refused to acknowledge weakness. He raised his rifle and fired. Each shot was precise. Each shot found its target. Raiders fell one after another as Jack walked steadily toward them, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but never slowing down. Behind him, Kara watched in amazement. This was not the quiet, patient man who had shared stories in the recreation hall. This was something else. Something that belonged in the myths he had spoken of. Something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Move up, Varax ordered his remaining warriors. Support the human. They advanced together, forming a line behind Jack. The Thalassians fired their heavy plasma weapons while the humans provided precise rifle fire. But everyone's eyes kept returning to the man at the front. The man who walked through gunfire as if it did not exist. A raider with a plasma cannon took aim at Jack. The weapon could punch through Thalassian armor. It could destroy vehicles. One hit would end even the most stubborn human. Kara saw the danger and moved without thinking. She sprinted forward, tackled Jack to the ground, and felt the heat of the plasma bolt pass just above them. For a moment, they lay in the dirt together, breathing hard. "Good instincts, Lieutenant," Jack said. He was actually smiling. Then he was up again, moving toward the raider with the cannon. The enemy tried to fire a second shot, but Jack was faster. He closed the distance in seconds, drew his knife, and ended the threat before the weapon could charge. Varax watched this happen with wide eyes. He had never seen a being move like that. Never seen someone so badly wounded fight with such speed and ferocity. In that moment, every dismissive word he had ever spoken about humans turned to ash in his mouth. The battle continued. The coalition soldiers pushed forward, using the confusion Jack had created to gain ground. Buildings on either side provided some cover now, and the raiders found themselves caught in a crossfire, but there were still too many of them. For every raider who fell, 2 more seemed to appear. The coalition soldiers were running low on ammunition. The wounded were slowing down. Even Jack was moving differently now, his body finally beginning to fail despite his will. A raider broke through the line and charged directly at Kara. She raised her rifle, but it was empty. For one terrible second, she saw her death approaching. Then Jack was there. He stepped between her and the raider, taking a blade that was meant for her chest. The weapon pierced his side, a wound that would kill most beings within minutes. Jack grabbed the raider by the throat, lifted him off the ground with his prosthetic arm, and threw him into a wall with enough force to end the fight. Kara caught Jack as he stumbled. His blood was everywhere. His eyes were losing focus, but he was still trying to move forward. "Sir, please," she begged. "Stop. You have done enough." Jack shook his head weakly. "Not yet. They are still coming." And they were. The remaining raiders were grouping for one final push. 30 of them against a handful of coalition survivors. This was the end. Then the sky lit up. Coalition dropships descended through the clouds, their weapons blazing. Heavy cannon fire tore through the raider positions. Transport ships landed in the streets, and fresh soldiers poured out to engage the enemy. The rescue had arrived. Within minutes, the battle was over. The surviving raiders surrendered or fled. The colony was saved. Kara lowered Jack gently to the ground as medical teams rushed toward them. He was barely conscious now, his body finally accepting the punishment it had endured. Varax limped over and stood above the wounded human. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he spoke a phrase in the Thalassian language, words that sounded ancient and sacred. Kara looked up at him. "What does that mean?" "Keshara Volith," Varax said. "One who walks beyond death." It is a title we have not used in generations. We thought such beings no longer existed. He knelt down beside Jack, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "I was wrong, human. About everything. What I saw tonight goes beyond anything in our own histories." Jack's eyes flickered open. His voice was barely a whisper. "Told you. Every myth has a seed of truth." 2 weeks later, Jack woke up in the medical bay of Coalition Station Helios 9. His body was wrapped in bandages and healing patches. His prosthetic arm had been replaced with a newer model. Machines beeped softly around him, monitoring his slow recovery. The doctors had called it a miracle. They had counted his wounds and calculated how long he should have survived. The answer was minutes, not hours. Certainly not the extended battle he had fought. They had no explanation for how he was still alive. Jack did not try to explain. He simply accepted that he was still here and focused on healing. A knock came at the door. He looked up to see Commander Varax standing in the entrance. The Thalassian looked different. Smaller, somehow. More humble. "May I enter?" Varax asked. Jack nodded slowly. Varax walked to the bedside and stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. I came to apologize. For my words. For my arrogance. For everything I believed about your kind. There is nothing to apologize for, Commander. You are not wrong that humans are physically weaker than Thalassians. We are slower. We break easier. But you do not stay broken, Varax said. I watched you get shot, stabbed, beaten. I watched wounds appear on your body that would have killed any Thalassian 3 times over. And you kept fighting. You kept moving. You refused to fall. Jack smiled tiredly. It is just survival. Nothing special. No, Varax said firmly. It is more than that. What you showed me was the reason my ancestors created stories about the Undying Ones. I thought they were myths. Legends from a time when we did not know better. He paused. Now I think perhaps they were warnings. Reminders that some beings cannot be measured by size or strength alone. There was a long silence. Then Varax pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed. This was remarkable by itself. Thalassian commanders did not sit at the bedsides of wounded soldiers, especially not humans. Will you tell me more? Varax asked. More of your human myths? I would like to understand where you come from. What made you into what you are? Jack looked at the proud warrior who had mocked him just weeks ago. The same warrior who had fought beside him, who had been willing to die beside him, and who now sat here asking to learn. How much time do you have? Jack asked. Varax settled deeper into his chair. As much as you need. Jack began to speak, his voice soft but steady. He talked about ancient warriors and impossible last stands. He talked about mothers who lifted burning vehicles to save their children. He talked about soldiers who walked miles on shattered legs and climbed mountains with frozen limbs. He talked about the endless, stubborn, beautiful refusal of humans to accept defeat. And for the first time in his life, Varax listened without judgment. He listened with the wonder of someone discovering that the universe was larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. In the medical bay, watched over by beeping machines and the soft light of the stars, a bridge was built between 2 species. Not through words of anger or demonstrations of force, but through stories, through myths, through the simple act of one being sharing its truth with another. And somewhere in those stories, Varax finally understood what humans truly were. Not the weak, fragile creatures he had dismissed, but something far more dangerous. Something that would never, ever stop fighting. Something that even the Thalassians should respect.